I'm sure there are probably a lot of you here who like to go to the movies. Well, I'm one of those people. There was a movie back in the 1990s called Shadowland, and it starred Anthony Hopkins. You may be familiar with Anthony Hopkins because he's an actor from either England, I think England, and he starred in the movie Silence of the Lambs. He played Hannibal Lecter, and he received an Academy Award for that performance. But in this movie, it also takes place in England, and he is a professor at one of the prestigious universities in England. His wife is suffering with cancer. And so the movie talks about how he has to deal with that and how he comes to be a person of prayer. And so he prays to God. And we're not sure what he's praying for until he has a conversation with a gentleman at one of the pubs. They're having a drink together. And this man says to him, "I know that you pray, and I hear that your wife is getting better." And he turns to this man and he says, "I don't pray to change God. I pray that God will change me." What a humble prayer. I don't pray to change God. I pray that God will change me so that I can be open to whatever happens in life and I can accept it. So he was trying to accept the illness of his wife, and so that was his humble prayer to God. We all pray. But what do we pray for? Do we pray for what we want and what we need? Or do we let God take care of it? And do we pray that we can be open to whatever happens in our life? In the scriptures today, especially, see the AMBO and the other churches are over here, so I always point to that, but it's over here. In the scriptures today, we heard about two people who went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other a tax collector. And what was the prayer of the Pharisee? I don't know if you caught it in the gospel as our deacon read it today, but in it he said, he prayed to himself. He wasn't praying to God. He was praying to himself, and it was all about himself. He was glad that he wasn't like anyone else, that he wasn't greedy, that he didn't commit adultery, that he paid tithes and he fasted. It was all about what he did, and that's what he was thankful for. But what about the tax collector? He couldn't even raise his head to look up. He was so embarrassed by what he had done. He knew that he had cheated people. And so he comes before God to say, "Lord, this is who I am, and I beg you to be merciful to me, a sinner." And that was his prayer. He was open to God because he knew that God would be compassionate and God would be merciful to him. What about the other readings that we heard? That reading from the book of Sirach. That reading talks about people who are in need. And when we're in need, who do we go to? We go to God. We go to people who can help us. And so we had in that reading the orphan and the widow and the oppressed. And all of those people needed God. And so they went to God because they knew that God would hear their prayer. What did we sing in our responsorial psalm today? The Lord hears the cries of the poor. The poor go to God because they know that God will be there to help them. Those are all stances of humility, of a person with a humble heart. As I said in my opening remarks, we're not here today. The Scriptures don't challenge us to reflect on our prayer. They challenge us to reflect on the attitudes that we bring to our prayer. How do we come to our God each time we come in prayer? And what do we pray for? The Scriptures challenge us today to come with a humble heart, to come with humility. I have a quote from Thomas Merton. Many of you have heard his name. He's written many books. He was a Trappist monk. And this is what he has to say about humility. He writes, "Humility is absolutely necessary if one is to avoid acting like a child all of one's life. To grow up, in fact, means to become humble, to throw away the illusion that I am the center of everything, and that other people exist to provide me with comfort and pleasure. The gospel of Jesus challenges us to embrace the humble, God-centered faith of the tax collector, not the self-centered and self-absorbed claims of the Pharisee." The man in my story, in that movie, came with an open, humble heart to accept all that the Lord gave him in life. As we go forth this week, I would invite myself to reflect on humility. How humble am I? When I come before God, do I come before God with a humble heart? Because when we do that, I believe that God will be our strength. He is the strength that Paul talks about in that second reading, that God is my strength. When we come before the Lord in humility, God will answer our prayers, maybe not the way we want God to, and in God's own time. But hopefully we can be open today to whatever happens in our life, because we know that God walks with us as we walk with each other, and that God is our strength.